Now we're going to look at another area. Maybe you could say it fits perfectly in with growth because it's something that I'm hearing a lot about from growth marketers, app marketers, games marketers as well. Creative, right, is the one lever that marketers can really count on. And it's a way to grow your audience and grow your revenues. We're going to hear about this, how to turn the creative into competitive advantage. And our speaker, our guest, is Adam Stevens, Chief Product Officer, co-founder, Luna Labs. A little bit of background on you to kick off, Adam. In addition to being at Luna Labs and going to tell us about how we can create meaning from our creative data. A little bit about yourself. I understand and I see that 2020 was a big year for you over at Luna. You nearly tripled from 15 people to 40 people, and that's quite an accomplishment. And another accomplishment to note is that you have a track record working with app developers the past 8 years at Google AdMob. Before that, technical program manager and product lead for Facebook Audience Network SDK. The title of the session, We're Only as Good as Our Last Creative, How Insights and Creative Automation Can Transform Your Growth Strategy. Take it away, Adam.
So yeah, I'm Adam Stevens. So I'm CPO of Luna Labs. I'm super excited to be here today. It's my first time presenting at a digital event, so it's something new for me as well. But hopefully there's a lot of you there who are signing in either today or tomorrow to learn something about creatives. So my presentation is I'm going to be sharing with you how we can essentially use insights and ultimately automation to provide your team with a framework for success through creatives. And everything I say here today, I've tried to simplify it so that it's something you can take away and have to think about after the session. But obviously, you know, it doesn't matter about the size of your studio. You can layer up all the kind of principles that I talk about to effectively grow your studio's creative abilities. So yeah, as a quick introduction to myself, obviously I'm Adam. I am CPO of Luna Labs. So Luna is a creative technology company. And our goal really is around providing solutions for mobile game studios to be able to optimize, manage, create, build all their playable ads and video ads from one centralized place. And we do that through technology, which is self-serve. So that's really our mission objective. The company was founded in 2018. And as Peggy said, we were 15 people at the start of 2020, and we ended it with just over 40 people. And our headquarters is in London, and also we have offices in Minsk, in Croatia, the Netherlands, Israel, and also the US. Before I get straight into the meat of the presentation, though, I think it would be interesting to borrow 15 seconds of your time and just ask you to take a look at these two creatives. And while you're doing it, try and keep track of what you're thinking about whilst you're watching them. So we'll go ahead with a countdown. So from a user perspective, I would imagine that you form some kind of, I don't know, emotional reaction to the videos. Maybe you have questions, maybe you have expectations. Perhaps you didn't think about anything. Maybe you just watched them and they didn't really resonate with you. But the key thing I want to kind of draw your attention to here is, what do you think the user acquisition manager, what do you think of the developer of this game is able to understand from what just happened, much more than you were? So essentially, the developer is going to see some data around this. The data could be in the forms of impressions or clicks, or maybe their user also installed the app and then they'll have all that retention data and the engagement data from that. But essentially, what I'm trying to point out here is that there's only so much that the developer and the user acquisition manager could even learn from this set of data. And really, that's what we're going to be honing in on in this talk. And that's a key problem. It's a problem which every team will face at some stage, and something that we should strive to solve is like, how can we bring meaning to this data? So we want to try and turn this data into so much more than a 0 or 1, an install or not an install, a yes or a no. And to do that, we need to create a framework for our creative production that allows us to add meaning to the data. And so here's what a process can look like. To build a creative process that allows you to do this, we recommend that you control, measure, and understand your creatives. And we'll break this down throughout the presentation into those 3 points. So point 1 is all about controlling the input. This is having a firm understanding and creating a framework around your creative production that allows you to then go on to stage 2 and measure it. And with those 2 things combined, you can actually create a level of understanding which is quite unique and gives you that unique advantage as a studio. And obviously you want to be able to repeat this as well, which is something we'll talk about quite a lot. So before I go into the actual steps 1, 2, 3, I think it's interesting to talk about what are the goals out of any creative process which we create as a team. Now, first of all, efficiency. So we want to make sure that we're making the best use of people's times. At the end of the day, we only have a limited amount of resources as a studio or as a developer. And it's really important that we use that time wisely. So efficiency is key to any creative process that we're making. Also with regards to time, right? Normally you'll find that you're making these creatives with a time limit. And so making sure that the process allows your team to move quickly is super important. Second one is kind of obvious, right? We need something to be effective. We need it to work. But ultimately, we need it to be driving performance for us as well. So really effective here can be interpreted in 2 ways. The third point is about making it repeatable. So with a process, you'll find this is what we're trying to get away from. You don't want to have these like one-hit creatives that you don't really understand why that happened, but you're going to go again and potentially, hopefully one day you'll find another hero creative. The idea is that you make a process which ensures that time and time again, you're able to repeat the performance. At the end of the day, we're making a business, also we're making games, right? But it's a business and you need to make sure that you're able to hit your KPIs. And then the fourth factor which brings us all together is predictability. Again, coming back to that business concept, you're part of a team of a wider organization. You need to have predictability to the monetization team, to the games team about the amount of traffic that's come in. You need to build a process that you can eventually rely on. So actually, I switched it up a little bit. I thought it would be very interesting to start with a case study. And I did this because it helps you visualize what I'm talking about throughout the presentation. So this is a case study from one of our long-term partners at Luna. They're Elictus. This is one of their games, Moneybuster, which was top of the charts. And if you followed, these are actually 4 different playables which they ran throughout the time of that kind of acquisition campaign. And you'll see they started on the left-hand side with a simple design with a dollar bill that you would shred in a shredder. And then they stepped into this kind of process of iteration. And again, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but they were able to find that changing the dollar bill to a card changed the CTR by 8% in a pure split test. Now, again, they iterated further and found that changing the layout of the shredder gave them a further 5%. And then finally, changing the layout completely, the shredder type, which actually makes the game seem much more minimalistic and actually bring more focus to the tutorial, gave them a further 9%. So actually from start to finish, by following a process that they devised internally, they're able to drive that CTR up by 22%. And that's just through one creative. And it's keys and success stories like this, which actually show you how the top developers are able to achieve success after success. And we're hopefully going to give you some of those insights. So stage 1 is to build a system that allows you to control your creative input. This is like really the key point about how to formulate your ideas and how to structure them in a way that allows you to then create meaning out of them at the end of the process. So generally, I like to break down creative building into 2 segments. So the first one is all about ideation. And this is kind of where you start. These are the blue sky thinking. This is where you come up with a concept around what you want to showcase in your game. So it could be winning level 13 in the jungle, right? Or it could be failing the level again and again in the desert, right? These are markedly different experiences that showcase your game, but in a unique way. So once you have your idea, generally what we recommend then is to drop down vertically and start creating your variations or your slight variances on that idea. So it could be the character, the camera angle, it could be whether it's nighttime or daytime. These are subtle changes that don't really deviate too far from the main concept, but they actually allow you to test different visual aspects of the game, different characters, things that might actually draw in different emotions from the user, all while staying within that bracket of the general idea. And we do this so we can keep track of the ideas. So you'll see that we have, let's say, theme 1, and you could drop down and have 5 to 10 different variations of that theme. And when you're doing that, you're able to track every single thing that you're changing within that theme. And that's super important to remember. And this is kind of the key idea around point 1. And hopefully you'll be able to look back to that Moneybuster playable and start thinking about what were the different variations they changed within that theme. So once you've done that, the next step is to measure the output. Now, don't worry, this is something we all do today, so it's nothing new. But just to call out how important it is that you actually really measure meaningfully the results that you get from each one of these creators that you're testing on a given network. Also, it's important to call out the fact around data reliability. You want to make sure that this test is fair. Many of the networks today provide you with A/B testing or split testing functionality that allow you to draw reliable conclusions from that data. So once you've controlled the input and then measured the output, the key thing here is to start understanding what the drivers in performance were, and you can relate those from start to finish. I'm going to talk about videos and playable ads slightly differently because they each have, you know, a different approach that you would take, but essentially we're going to be following the same thing, the same theme. So this is all about understanding. Now, typically we refer to videos as black boxes. You put them live, you get some data at the end, you make a subjective formulated opinion over why that video performed or didn't. And really the skill set here is around understanding all the elements of that video and making that conclusion. But what we'd be recommending is actually you can remove that kind of feeling of a black box. And this is a very simple example. But by breaking down all those variants into their subcomponents and analyzing the data side by side, you can start to kind of identify those key drivers. So in this example, and hopefully this is obvious, but people love cowboys and they love them when they're in the snow. I'm sure that's obvious. But the key thing here is what you're doing is you're actually compartmentalizing the key drivers, as I mentioned, but you're taking them out as key takeaways. So what you can do from this point onwards is use that knowledge as, it's almost like training your internal muscle around the creative development process. You're learning what works and you're using that for the next iteration. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Again, this is quite simplified. You can imagine that, you know, in a bigger production cycle, you might have 50 things that you're testing over the course of a month. But on each one of those tests, you're actually able to find something new and something that you can use as a lever for the next iteration round. So playable ads are interesting and in my opinion, very exciting around what you can do with them, because obviously you can control the input and you can decide what that user flow looks like and what the, you know, the theme is and what the character's doing and all the visual stuff. And obviously you can measure the output. But actually we're seeing more and more, and this is, I think, going to be a trend in 2021, the ability to add that third metric to your analysis, and that's the engagement data. So playables, as the HTML5 content, allow you to track different elements and different parts of the user journey with metrics. So you could track how many users start the tutorial, how many users end the tutorial, whether the user wins, whether the user loses, how long it takes them to complete that kind of engagement session. And really the key thing to think about here is that you can use this to almost drive your decision making. So think about a video. A video you might say the cowboy performed better and they performed better when they're in snow. If you move that into the playable scenario, then you say, well, actually, I can see that maybe in the cowboy scenario, the time to engage was much, much lower. Now that actually gives me a little bit more information around understanding that maybe the users actually are drawn into that game more because of the character. And you wouldn't have been able to tell that from a video. And obviously this has, you know, exponential effects when you start thinking about user journeys and, you know, the different trees that the user can go down, whether the win or the loss has a different impact on the emotion of the user. But just the core principle here is that you have all this information at your fingertips, and it's extremely important that you start thinking about how to use it. One thing I would say as well, and you know, we can't really get away from it, but in this IDFA-less world that we're heading towards, this is actually something tangible you can optimize for. Maybe you won't be able to optimize for the majority of your traffic for the install event, but hey, what about that 20% of traffic that you can optimize for? Can you get any learnings from that and say, you know, users who tend to win the level go on to install the app, and can I actually start using that as a parallel to all of my other optimization tactics? I think it's super interesting what this will look like in 2021. So what do you do next? So generally now, let's say we've run our creatives, we've had some learnings, we know what works well. What we want to do is use that as a checkpoint. So what we're doing is we're locking in on that performance and we're saying the cowboy with the snow worked well, or the bunny or the clown worked better than the other one. We're making these now data-led decisions around what is actually driving the performance. And we're using that for our next round of iterations. And so what we're able to do is continually push ourselves up, ratchet up the performance until eventually we'll find that hero creative, that kind of end result of all of this testing that allows us to have a successful game launch. The one thing I would call out here is that, you know, ideation, when you're creating those brand new concepts, that's where you're going to see the step changes in performance. This process isn't going to allow you to change a color and see a difference between 20 IPM and 50 IPM, right? This is going to take you that 10%, that 20% higher. And the reality is, in many cases that we've seen over the last couple of years, that's what really matters. You know, that last 10%, 20% is what gets you over the line to make it a positive margin, a positive ROAS. You know, it's really these small details which actually all add up to have quite a big meaningful impact. So use your checkpoints, and move through them quickly. And then the kind of final sentiment here is that I hope that you can start to understand that everything that we do is basically bringing more data into our decision making and removing a level of subjectivity. No longer do we have to say, I think that video performed because, or I think that playable ad worked well because. We can actually like back that up with the data. And what we've done is we've created a framework around that to enable the kind of decisions. And there's a load you can automate in this. If it's as simple as automating the data analysis or the tagging of your videos or the way that you interpret the analytics data, or, there's so much opportunity. My recommendation here is to start small. Obviously, build that process, invest in that process, but know that as you do step up and become more experienced and also become more complex in what you're doing, there's a load of opportunity to automate all these things. And we see this as a big trend in technology providers around trying to create this level of understanding around the creative in a very simplified manner. So what are the kind of key takeaways here? First of all, as Peggy started, I think creatives are the key lever for success in UA in 2021, especially considering the landscape changes. My recommendation is to build your team and build a process around bringing meaning to the data. So I think we live in a world where we don't need to be subjective anymore, where we don't need to have opinions. We can actually have data to back that up. And so my recommendation is to go do that. Always ideate first and then iterate. As I said, you're not going to find step changes in performance from changing a color, but you will from changing the complete look and feel of the ad and the emotional ties that you can draw. Obviously, you want to understand the performance drivers. So it might help you structure creatives in a way that allows you to do this. And what we're seeing, for example, with video is often people create these almost like small components of a video. So they have 3 to 5 different outros, 3 to 5 different intros, a different set of music that they use. These things are also things that you can use again and again. So actually, there's an added value there if you move towards that process in terms of your efficiency. Obviously, as I said a couple of times, knowing when to iterate versus ideate is really important. If you're on a 20 IPM and you need to get to a 40, don't waste your time on iterating. Look for that next step change, go back to ideating. Hopefully some of the ideas that you drew from the iteration were kind of important and helped you get there. But ideally you want to create a new concept in that case. And then finally, when it works, automate it. I think, as I said, we live in a world where this is becoming more and more easy and more prevalent. And I think the kind of end goal of everything we do here is to give your team more time to be creative, more time to find those pockets of success, and less time around this kind of manual data analysis or this variation testing. So looks like I did it just in 20 minutes. So hopefully that was on time. But yeah, I guess for me, thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions, or as it says here, you can always reach out to me on email or on Twitter.
Okay, and you did it just in time. Just gonna get this off here.
I should have called out at the beginning that it's like lockdown in London, and I have 2 small children who luckily didn't run and grab me, but they might have been screaming in the background at some stage.
That's okay. I had a screw up. I have a cat who pulled my camera down. And that's why I've been very careful with it, because I can't stop to get down on the floor and play with the cable. So did great job, Adam, and a very interesting topic. I mean, so timely, because as you pointed out, I won't force you to do it, but it would be interesting to have you just elaborate a little bit on the place and importance and potential of all of what you're talking about in the IDAF world, which you touched upon. Is there some advice around that? Because if this is going to be the way to approach it, if this is something tangible, rather, that you can measure, is there something within your presentation you can point out as some advice in that new world, in that brave new world?
Absolutely. So I think probably like everybody you've spoken to, nobody really knows what's going to happen at the end of this. There's a lot of very good articles, very good content online about hypotheses and opinions, but the reality is we're going to find out on day one, pretty much. Now, obviously, the consequences will be a bit of a ripple effect. So what we've been thinking about a lot internally at Luna is how, at the end of the day, attribution is going to become more challenging potentially, or it's going to be different at least. So all we can do is rely on the things that we know that we can almost like stake the fork in the ground, right? So with creatives, whether the creative works or not is always going to be a question. The attribution is just a confirmation of that. So what I'm trying to focus on with this presentation is how we can start answering that question internally and allow the results to speak themselves. So let me give you a tangible example. And we've done a couple of tests with this, right? And especially around playables. So we'll run a playable ad and we'll quickly learn around that, potentially 15% of users win the level 1 and, they can go on to win level 2. And actually that is the key behavior that we see within the playable that leads to high retention users. And I think what the point we're trying to make is that in this more difficult period to do the attribution, it's much better for you not to have a download than it is to have a download that instantly churns, because essentially you paid for that, right? So that's affecting your margin. So if we can draw conclusions from, let's say, Android, whilst we can still track there, or from 20% of users who've opted into IDFA to say, well, in general, users who win the level tend to show the behavior that will then lead to a higher retention user. That allows you to then optimize that experience instead of optimizing for the outcome. So with playables, we have quite a unique advantage. So what you'd be able to do is say, I'm now going to focus all my attention on making sure that as many users as possible can get through and win the level, with the belief that actually that content is then going to be driving a better outcome for me in the end. And what you'll be doing is you'll be monitoring the ROAS, monitoring your install rates, monitoring your retention, and obviously making sure that it doesn't deviate too far from your hypothesis. But I think it gives somebody something tangible to kind of aim towards. And I think that comes back to your point around, I think people need something to hang their hat on, right? They need to be able to say, okay, even though everything else is a bit up in the air right now, I'm going to focus on this. And I think creating a process like this and also using specifically playables as almost like this pre-first time user experience tutorial, right? It's almost like that gate to your game. It's a way for you to qualify the user and then back that up with data to make those decisions.
What I thought was really interesting, and I was live tweeting the whole time, compartmentalize everything. That was very interesting to me because I wanted to understand just how far down that goes, how granular can we get? Well, you're answering that. We do have, we sparked some questions. So answer that briefly. We'll get to the people because they matter more than my question, but I still want to know how granular you're saying we should go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question we get asked a lot. And I think the reality is it's going to be diminishing returns at the end of the day. Like if you've got a team that are optimizing for the font of an install button that shows for 3 seconds, then is it really worth the investment of your time to make that step change? And actually, are your users really going to care? I think what you need to do is find a balance between how much time it takes your team to invest into making these tests to the point where actually you're still seeing positive returns. So, seeing sub 1% changes in CTR, it's not really going to, move the needle. But, a lot of these tests, changing the camera angle, changing the character, they can have 5, 10, 15% changes with just a simple switch. Because again, coming back to that first slide where hopefully you just stared at the ads for 15 seconds and one of them didn't do anything because you didn't interact with it and one of them was just a video, you only have a small amount of time to capture that user. And I think even I was surprised very early on around how these subtle changes can make such a difference.
Yeah, and you showed in that case study, 12% CTR, that's a big difference. On that topic here, what are some impactful creative automation you see publishers are doing? Should developers build their own solutions versus third-party solutions?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Obviously, I don't want to act biased because Luna does provide some automation technology where we can do some of this testing for you. I think if we want to talk about it, objectively, then I think look for a solution that fits into your workflow in the best way possible. Kind of coming back to those goals, right? Efficiency, effectiveness, repeatability, and predictability. You want to find a partner or a technology solution that aligns with that. If you want to go build it yourself, then also you have to realize that you might have to input a lot of effort before you see any returns on that as well. So generally, I'd say start small, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But if you can figure out a way to use some tools mixed with your own kind of internal data systems, that's also learning for me. We have a lot of this technology at Luna, but many of the big studios have a very complicated BI system internally that they use. So for us as a technology provider, it's all about how do we fit into that workflow. So I think it's really got to be a balance.
Okay.
But generally, I would say just prove it to yourself first, if I'm honest. Like, do a test. It's not going to take you long, couple of hours, couple of days to set up a statistical test where you can go and actually see the value this provides. And then with everything, I think as soon as you see the value, that's where you double down, right? And that's where you can kind of justify the investment, whether it be in time or technology. But yeah, I honestly think there's a lot of technology providers, not just Luna, who are rising into this kind of area around, augmented data on top of your creatives. And generally, as a game studio, you've always got to make that trade-off between what do you do versus what do you outsource. Sometimes outsourcing is the best way if it means you can focus on being creative, which I think is still something which I kind of emphasize with our partners and with colleagues, that it's one thing you can't change. Have you got a good game? Have you got a good creative? And the rest is all just optimizing.
And of course, you showed pays off, pays dividends. I mean, it is worth the effort, whether you do it by yourself or with a solutions provider. One last question we have here. Are there any tips for testing creative variation specifically for multiplayer games? What's the best way to emphasize the multiplayer aspect of casual games? 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I mean, there's two trains of thoughts, right? There's one that goes down the road of people like playing multiplayer games because of a challenge. Coming back to the previous talk around the feeling of winning, that emotion sense to wanting to beat the other person. I would say not necessarily have to showcase the multiplayer aspect of the game. Maybe you can like show it in a snippet or in a quick kind of brief section of a video, for example. But generally what we're seeing as a trend is trying to tap into that emotional driver as opposed to the actual direct, hey, this is a multiplayer game, you want to play it, right? Trying to find an element of the game using your game's animations, your game's art, something about the game that's compelling, that gives that kind of competitive itch to the user. I think, what we're seeing, especially with more mid-core casual games, is that they'll do that kind of orthogonal gameplay experience that does do that, whilst not having to say, because you can't explain a multiplayer game in 15 seconds most of the time. So my recommendation is definitely do that. Definitely look for those emotional drivers and try and find small, fun, engaging experience to kind of bring that emotion to light. And then the second thing I'd say is experimenting. So, whilst you do want to have this kind of, as I said, this kind of parallel creative strategy that doesn't necessarily represent 100% the gameplay, I think it's important that you do try and break down that multiplayer gameplay into kind of smaller sections. And as I said, dot them around. So we have seen some success with taking, maybe a more complicated multiplayer game with a leaderboard and breaking that down into like a 10-second playable followed by a second section of the playable that shows something slightly different. So you're still kind of giving them that feeling, but you're not making it overwhelming by making it like a full 30-second experience that ends up just feeling like a mini game.
And also like the handoff there in the experience. There's this piece of what is really emotional, really catchy, going to appeal to me about the gameplay. Then there's another aspect of the creative and they sort of work together. I'll take another question because that's what it's about here. People want to learn how much a performance video has the chance to be the best app preview in the App Store. So how much of a chance, I guess, does a performance video have to be the best app preview in the App Store? So that's what I'm trying to understand here.
Yeah.
How much a performant video have the chance to be the best app preview in the App Store? Maybe there's something around how much of a chance a good performing or highly performing creative video will have to be the best preview.
So maybe they can clarify, but I can tell you one interesting thing against the App Store videos is that, we're seeing a general trend that the marketing team is now starting to view the App Store as a second dimension for them. Because if you imagine you do all this work and send someone to the App Store, essentially that's your front page, right? That's your entry point. And whether they convert or not, typically would be seen as, that's almost in the hands of the gods. Obviously, we have ASO companies who do an amazing job around testing and proving the theory that actually these changes in screenshots, descriptions, names, icons all have a material impact. And so what we're also seeing is people applying this creative strategy also to the app stores. So testing those variations, those changes in themes also within that environment is also like shouldn't be ignored. Like that's another arm to your creative team, and also another way for you to maximize the output, because they've gone to all this hard work of creating videos, some of them which will never see the light of day. There's a huge opportunity and another surface for you to use on the App Store, where again, you're landing there after a click. Does the creative match the creative that you just showed them? You know, is it a different character? Is it a different theme? Does that work? Does it not work? Something you'll have to answer for yourself. But again, I think coming back to the efficiency point, like it's definitely an opportunity for the creative teams to actually, you know, almost like their work to bleed into that aspect of optimization as well.
Okay, I'm tempted. We do have one more question. Maybe you do it really fast because we have another really amazing panel, do's and don'ts of marketing and UA. We can't keep people waiting for that one, Adam. But okay, one more. How can I perform this type of testing at scale easily? I understand your points. By creating hundreds of playable ads to pull all this together, it seems like it could be very time consuming.
Definitely.
Yeah, true. So how can you do it at scale?
Yeah, I mean,
is that where the
100%.
automation comes in?
Absolutely. So, you know, again, to mention something that Luna is doing right now is actually, we're actually able to dynamically change the content of the playable on the fly, so that actually you could create one playable ad with 100 variations held within the ad, and that ad will dynamically optimize itself. So this is something which I think is going to be an even bigger trend in 2021, especially when you can start thinking about, I want to optimize the character choice for the number of people who reach the end of the level. Maybe that's like the perfect thing for you to optimize for. You don't need IDFA for that, right? You just need the engagement data. So actually, we're seeing a lot of investment in automation around this. Obviously, I'm happy to talk about it because I work for a company that does that. But you know, there's a number of people investing in that, and I think that's definitely something I would recommend looking into, regardless of how you do it or who you do it with. I'm trying to be, you know, unbiased here.
Okay, Adam, you've started an avalanche of questions. I think you're going to have to stick around in Discord or go off in one of the rooms and stay there, or you know, stick around for a couple questions. Are you planning to do that?
Yeah, sure. Also, you can email me. I'm always happy to jump into an email or on a call. And I live this stuff, so I'm always talking about it anyway.
Okay, because I'm going to have to let it go for a bit. Adam, it was very interesting, very, very informative. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the last minute avalanche here. People want to do this at scale. They want to understand more about gaming. Well, I wouldn't say gaming the App Store. Did I say that? No.
No, I didn't hear
They want to learn about succeeding in the App Store with creatives. I'll let you go and move on to our next panel. Thanks so much for sharing. All right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.